Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for an Americans for Limited Government live stream. I'm Catherine Mortensen. I'm joined by Rick Manning today, the president of Americans for Limited Government. And what we want to talk to you about today is a story that is just breaking. We all get alerts on our phones all day long. I get alerts from the Wall Street Journal. And really, just about an hour ago, I got an alert that I just jumped up and ran into Rick's office. I said, "You will not believe this. The Biden administration is in talks right now with attorneys representing families who were separated at the border back in 2018. The talks are a settlement, a massive, potentially $1 billion settlement where families could get approximately $1 million for family if for having been separated. Remember when the children and the parents were separated under the zero tolerance policy that Trump enacted in 2018? Anyway, it just blew my mind that that's even a thing. So, Rick, what was your initial reaction? You've read the story. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is a sue and settle case. It is the ACLU sued on behalf of the of so-called separated families, recognizing that many of those families that were separated, there was no way to know if the adult actually went with the child. And so it was a legitimate attempt to make certain that we weren't having human traffickers bring children, vulnerable children, across the border to be abused on this side of the border. That's what that was about. And so they had and so what ends up happening is now, after the fact, the Biden administration, Department of Justice is trying to enter into a plea agreement, essentially an agreement, stipulated agreement, where you'd have massive payouts to families that were allegedly in some way, shape, or form harmed through this process. While committing an illegal act, by the way, it's obscene, it's absurd. It goes to show you that there's absolutely, the real reason for this is so they can put a permanent condemnation on the policy of the Trump administration, which was to try to actually make certain that drug traffickers and human traffickers weren't bringing children across our border to be abused. And they want to put a permanent stain on it by having the Department of Justice agree, stipulate in court, that it was wrong and that harm was done to children as a result. And they're going to spend $1 billion. They're going to give money to people who basically they're going to get the golden ticket. They're not only got to be in America, but now they're going to get a massive amount of money, taxpayer dollars, and will never have to work a day in their life. They can go back home and be the wealthiest people in town, all because of a Biden administration attempt to create a narrative, to establish a legal narrative that would make it really difficult in the future to ever engage in a policy that stopped people from coming across this border.
Rick, Richard Kinnear writes on Facebook, "No!" ! I'm with you, Richard. That is exactly my reaction. Like, this cannot be happening in our country. And I will read.
It's insane.
I'll read just a little bit from the Wall Street Journal article, because obviously it goes into a lot more detail. So let me pull that screen up. Okay. As Rick mentioned, the American Civil Liberties Union is the one representing families in the lawsuit. It has identified about 5,500 children separated at the border over the course of the Trump administration, citing figures provided by the government. The number of families eligible under the potential settlement is expected to be smaller, the people said, as government officials are not sure how many will come forward. Around 940 claims have so far been filed by families. Oh, and Rick, yes, so far 940. Wow. Okay, by close of business today, what do you think that number is going to be, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. They're going to end up finding a lot of people are going to be making claims, and the irony will be they won't even know. They'll have a hard time determining even if the people who are making claims were the people who were actually affected. But listen, this isn't about the law. This isn't about children being abused at the border, because they weren't. This is about making politically making a statement. While on one hand, they say, we don't want people coming across our border. On the other hand, they say, come on across. It's the payday of a lifetime. Heck, I'm thinking of renouncing my citizenship and going to the southern border and coming across and see if I can get a payday.
Thank you, Rick. Exactly. I mean, what kind of a magnet will this create for people? I mean, when you can get a shakedown the government and walk away with $1 million, and you're the one breaking the laws.
Yeah, think of the precedent here, because right now there are hundreds of thousands of people who've been processed in the last couple of months. We've had at least 50, 60,000 put across the border in the last couple of months. We've arrested and returned another few hundred thousand, 150,000. And so now that you can make a claim about your kind of the holding period, imagine the claims that can come forward that the Department of Justice can say, oh yeah, we're gonna pay off on that too. Essentially, every single person who was rejected at the border could claim that they had been abused in some way and get a giant payday. And oh, by the way, understand that the group that actually represents them, the attorneys that represent them, get a solid 1/3 of whatever the settlement is. So if there's $1 billion settlement, the ACLU gets $330 million out of this under a normal attorney-client agreement. So this is a massive payday for leftist groups, and it's a massive payday for illegal aliens. And it's the losers are the American taxpayers, and everyone in this country was dumb enough to come here legally.
Rick, the Wall Street Journal article says that these lawsuits claim that the government subjected them to, quote, lasting psychological trauma. And these were immigration agents were separating thousands of children, ranging from infants to teenagers, from their parents at the southern border in 2018, after they had, and these are the words of the Wall Street Journal, after they had crossed illegally from Mexico to seek asylum in the U.S. So this isn't even like a debatable or a subjective standard. This is a statement of fact. These people crossed illegally into our country. That should be the end of the story. And I'm so upset that they are retaining lawyers, or that lawyers, let's put it this way, Rick. I bet you 9-1 that these individuals did not go out and seek representation from a lawyer. The lawyers went to these people and made victims out of them and told them they were victims and we need to represent you. So I think that that's disgusting what the ACLU did. And there might be other groups involved as well. But they told these individuals that they suffered psychological trauma. And then here's a quote. Yeah.
I understand, Catherine. Go ahead and say what the quote is.
Okay. Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrant Rights Protection and lead negotiator on one of the lawsuits, was quoted in the Wall Street Journal. He says, the remedy for these families must include not only meaningful monetary compensation, but a pathway to remain in the country. I mean, Rick, it's just an outrage upon outrage with this story.
It is. And listen, the key to this kind of settlement is it is more than likely that the government actually was talking, the Department of Justice was actually talking to the plaintiffs during the entire time. And we're telling them exactly what they would settle on. So the claims could be made, and it's basically a fixed game, because there's no way to appeal it. Both sides in a dispute agree to an outcome. People on the outside don't get to appeal it, even though supposedly we're represented by the government. In this case, the government's representing they're representing their own interests, which is the left-wing agenda of trying to get as many people in this country as possible from around the world, and and to effectively make them wards of the state in every way, shape, or form. This is all about attracting more people. It's all about attracting more people into the country. And imagine the every single person who's come in contact with Border Patrol now can say, gee, something bad happened to me, I'm suing. And that's the reality. That's what's going to happen. I want to remind people, though, about the journey from Central America to the United States, and the fact that we know that when parents would hand their 9-year-old girls over to the coyotes who would bring them north, that they would equip them with birth control. 9-year-old girls equipped with birth control because they knew raped along the way. They knew that they were going to be essentially enslaved during the journey, that they would have no say-so about anything, and that they would be victimized in every way you can imagine. And so that's what parents knew when they put their children in the hands of these coyotes. That was their expectation. And to have an assumption then that by separating people at the border, by taking the kids and saying, let's make certain that these kids are really with their parents, that they're not with somebody who's abusing them, who's going to put them into a slave situation, into pornography or anything like that. Let's figure it out. And so we get it right to make sure these kids, they might spend 10 days here, but it's better to spend 10 days here than a lifetime in subjugation, because we gave them to somebody who isn't their parent, who doesn't have their best interests at heart, wants to use them for the rest of their life. That's the reality of what happened at the border. And for anybody to sit there and say you should not make certain that children who come across the border are, if you're going to let them stay, are going to be with parents, actual parents, rather than with somebody who just is using them to get across the border. If you're not smart enough to understand that that's exactly what they should do. If they're going to let them stay, make certain they're at least with the people who are going to love them here. And that's what we were doing. That's what the Border Patrol was doing. And this cast the Border Patrol in the light of being abusers who didn't feed these kids, who didn't give them water, didn't give them good circumstances. You want to know what kids in cages were? Kids in cages are what we saw when the Obama administration was doing this, with Joe Biden being vice president, where they literally were in cages, when they were in chain link fence cages. That's kids in cages. We saw that during the Biden administration, during the Obama administration. And the facilities were, you still have cramped facilities, but they were significantly better during the Trump administration. I'll tell you guys, I'm kind of ranting, but I feel so irritated about this. I think people need to realize when the government shut down over the wall, I remember when the government shut down over the wall, what the Democrats were objecting to wasn't just the wall. It was spending money to actually upgrade those facilities so people who were being held to determine status would not be in cages, would be in facilities where there were enough beds and the like. That money. There's $400 million that was in the Trump proposal, in President Trump's proposal, that went along with the wall. But it was to actually do something about housing people, putting the personnel in place, making sure there was the necessary goods and items to be able to keep the people who are there if they're babies in diapers, just all the personal care needs that exist. And that's what happened. Democrats would not pass that bill. They closed down the government to avoid having actual humanitarian aid put down there, so people were not being housed in substandard housing, in substandard circumstances. And so that's what the Democrats did. Donald Trump tried to actually put money into the budget to get that done, and they shut down the government over it. So never let anybody tell you that it was Donald Trump who wanted to make certain that these kids were being held and harmed in any way. He tried to fund it so they would not be harmed, so that we could get it sorted out in a clean and fair manner and enforce our own laws. That's what he tried to do. The Democrats, on the other hand, didn't want to have adequate facilities. The Democrats were fine with them being in cages when it was the Trump administration. The Democrats didn't care when they were in cages when it was the Obama administration. And what they wanted is to trap kids in cages in the Trump administration so they could have a reason to vote against him, a reason to attack him. Bottom line is, that's the reality of what happened in that fight. And the Democrats who say that these things were untrue, that these atrocities were occurring, they occurred. If they occurred because Democrats wouldn't fund adequate facilities.
Going back to the Wall Street Journal article, they quote Lee Gallant of the ACLU. He says, President Biden has agreed that the family separation policy is a historic moral stain on our nation that must be fully remedied. And then later in the article, it notes that in his first week in office, let me find it, the president, President Biden, he said he pledged to reunite separated families, describing those actions undertaken by the Trump administration as a moral and national shame. But here's the only thing here one thing that I find very interesting. The article notes that the discussions over this settlement have been contentious. They've taken place over the past few months among a group of a dozen of private lawyers representing the families and government lawyers. Some government lawyers have viewed the payouts as excessive for people who had violated the law by crossing the border. One government lawyer has threatened to remove his name from the case out of disagreement with the potential settlement offer. I mean, that's something at least. I mean, I wish that these government attorneys would just flat out resign and, blow the lid on this. This is outrageous. This is not a good use of taxpayer money. And I just get so frustrated, Rick, because I feel like no one in Washington is watching out for me and my dollars. Like, they're out there spending other people's money. They don't seem to know that it actually is somebody's money, and it's my money, and it's your money, and they're just throwing it away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're 100% correct. It's but I mean, recognize that what Joe Biden's immigration policy that the ACLU lawyer is talking about is the same immigration policy that's caused us to have July and August being record illegal immigration months in history. Record illegal immigration months. It's the same policy which has essentially invited people from all over the world to come here without following our immigration laws. It's the same policy that has allowed, we've had about 400,000 by the Department of Homeland Security's own reckoning, about 400,000 people who were not arrested and got away on time, and so they entered into our country illegally without being processed. We have another similar amount who ended up being processed into the country because the criteria are so loose. We know that there are dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds upon hundreds, of people who are terrorists who've been identified and rejected during the immigration process. We know that the Border Patrols had to save countless lives where the coyotes abandoned people, and the Border Patrol saves them, leaving holes in the network, the surveillance network, so they can sneak people through who wouldn't be able to be processed through any other way. We know that ranches in Arizona and Texas and New Mexico and California have regularly find rape trees where they find the undergarments of young girls hung on those trees as a monument to their abuse that they withstood in order to get into the country. This is abhorrent. What Joe Biden is doing when the entire immigration policy is the stain on America. It is the thing that makes me ashamed, because they pretend to have compassion, but in reality, it's a cold calculation. They know that those people are being abused the entire way. They know they're having their money stolen from them. They know they're being left abandoned in trucks and cars and finding people stuffed in a truck dead. We found dozens dead in those circumstances. We know what's happening. We know what's happening, and it's happening more and more and more because this administration has opened a door, and this Congress wants to establish amnesty for 8 million people. And if you get your foot on our land, at that point, you've got a chance of the golden ticket. And they have created a situation where people are being abused, and it's directly because the American government is telling them, come to America, there'll be no repercussions. And in this case, come to America with your children, and you might get a payday of $1 million. I mean, this is insane. It is truly insane. It's evil, and the American people need to just tell their members of Congress that they need to defund this settlement. They need to say no to this settlement. There's no excuse to do this. We have to hold the Department of Justice accountable. Department of Justice doesn't get to spend money. Congress spends money. So the Congress needs to be telling the Department of Justice, you will not enter into this settlement and block the settlement. That's the only recourse we have. That's the one we have to take.
Well, I appreciate you explaining that to me, that there may be some way for people like myself to have a voice where I can write a letter or an email to my member of Congress saying, I don't want any federal tax dollars going to these settlements, because this really is just a shakedown. And it will be, as you said, it will create an incentive for more of this. I mean, heck, if you can come across the border with your child, spend a day in a detention facility and get this kind of payout, who wouldn't do that? I mean, like I say a lot of times about the people south of the border in those poor Central American countries, they may be poor, but they are not stupid. That is for sure. They're not stupid. They're smart. They get it. They get what's going on in America. They figured it out, that you can come here with no consequences. And not only that, but now you have the chance at $1 million payout for your family. Why wouldn't you do it? I mean, there's almost zero downside for these people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's almost zero downside. And it's and part that people don't talk about is the destruction that occurs in their countries they leave, because the young are the ones who are leaving, and it's hollowing out the ability for those countries to have an economic base. It's hollowing out and as a result, the governments of those countries, of Guatemala, of El Salvador, of Honduras, they don't want their young people leaving. They want their young people staying and growing the country. And instead, what's happening is their greatest export ends up being their people. And unfortunately, America is now saying, hollow out your country and leave only your old and infirm in your country. We'll give you the foreign aid to take care of them, and we'll take everybody out of your country who's working age or your whole out of your prison system. You send us everybody, and we'll filter them in. Don't worry about it. It's just it's heartrending. And there is something, like I say, there is something can be done about this decision. It's hard to get done, but members of Congress can deny funding for this settlement. And if they deny funding for this settlement, at that point, the settlement ends up being put into limbo. And because the courts can say whatever they want, the Justice Department can say whatever it wants, but if Congress won't let them spend the money, at that point, they have to convince the American people that this money deserves to be spent. So Congress needs to take action. They can take action. It's tough to take action when you've got the Democrat majority, but darn it, we have to try. We have to force the Democrats to vote for this. We have to force the Democrats to choose to say, we're going to spend $1 billion on illegal aliens and while we have our veterans sitting on the streets in homeless encampments, that we'd rather spend our money on illegal aliens who break our law than to try to provide assistance to those who risked it all for our nation's freedom. And it sounds like a strange either or, but that is an either or that's real. And if they're not willing to put the veterans who are homeless, who are trying to get a foot up after fighting for this country, if they're going to put them in second place behind the illegal aliens who came to this country with no invitation, well, a tacit invitation, but came to this country illegally, then those people who want to do that need to pay the price for that politically.
And I'll just say one last thing, Rick. Where's Kamala Harris? Remember when she was going to work on solving the root problems in Central America and in these poor countries so that those people wouldn't feel the need to flee over the border and come to America? That's definitely not happening. We have a caravan of about 60,000 of them just across the border in Mexico now headed our way. You told me yesterday that the leader is threatening violence if they are in any way impeded or stopped or prevented from entering our country. I mean, it's complete lawlessness down at our border. And now they want to incentivize these immigrants even further with potentially $1 billion payout. It's got to stop. Yeah, let's see.
It does. And
Jeremy says, try to jump the border into Mexico and see what their government does to you. That's exactly right, Jeremy. I mean, if you break the laws in another country, God help you, because the government in those countries is certainly not going to help you. In America, you break our laws, and not only will the government help you, they're going to give you a massive payout. So, wow, let's just celebrate what's happening right now with the Biden administration.
Yeah, it is absurd. We've given what people can do about it. Bottom line is, this is just another reason why we have to stop the reconciliation bill. It's because it does provide amnesty for 8 million people. It does provide pathway to green cards, which is the pathway to citizenship, dramatically expands the number of green cards. It has lasting implications in terms of the future immigration into this country. Because remember, once somebody is here and they get any kind of legal status, then you can engage in chain migration by inviting your relatives to come in. And the exponential growth of immigration into the country based on chain migration is almost impossible to stop once it starts. So we have to stand up now. The reconciliation bill will dramatically alter the immigration system in this country, and we need to say no. We need to just tell them no. And it's a fight that we're having. It's a fight we have every day. There's been some discussion that the reconciliation bill can't have the amnesty stuff in it, but nonetheless, understand that's what they're trying to do. And we can't allow any last minute adjustments to further that. And quite honestly, if Republicans were willing to vote for reconciliation, which they should not, that would be another opportunity to stop this. So you can't. The Republicans can't participate. So it's got to be Democrats who say no. And the two Democrats who will say no in reconciliation right now are Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. And so that's maybe. So they're the ones with the keys to the castle on this. And let's hope that they stand firm and stop the reconciliation from going forward, and hence save us from a whole bunch of heartaches that we're going to have as we provide social services for a whole bunch of people who shouldn't be here in the first place. And I've got to say this, because anytime people take stuff out of context, I have no problem with the people who live around the world. I have problems with people who break our law. Our law has an immigration system. We have a system set up. People can legally come here. But those who decide that they want to break down our borders, break down our walls, and come here illegally because they're entitled to the wealth that America has produced, those people, that's just not the way it works. And It's dangerous for our country, and in fact, it breaks our sovereignty. So we don't even have a sovereign nation anymore if you're not willing to defend your borders. And it's just so there's nothing against the people. It's about the fact that people cannot break our laws to come here and be rewarded. That can't happen because we'll never stop anybody from ever coming again. And breaking your laws should never be rewarded. In this case, it's going to get $1 billion worth of reward, and that's just the beginning as plaintiffs show up.
Well, Rick, well said, and thanks everyone for your comments. We're so grateful that you're joining us and that these issues resonate with you. And if you like what you're seeing, by all means, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do these live stream videos almost every day. I would say most afternoons. At some point in the day, Rick or another one of us on the staff is going to see something that is just so outrageous that we want to share it with you and alert you to what's going on. So we appreciate you being with us today. And again, follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube, and stand by and we'll close it out. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.